That cathedral spire is a carefully aimed arrow pointing to the sun. Across the medieval world, builders embedded a silent language of celestial alignments into stone, creating a hidden dialogue between earth and sky. This video will reveal 25 of these profound astronomical alignments in ancient infrastructure, from solstice sunlight in forgotten tombs to star maps carved in chapel vaults. You will gain a completely new lens for seeing history, one that decodes the cosmic ambitions written into castles, churches, and city streets. We will uncover why a Crusader fortress might track a specific star and how an entire island monastery functions as a lunar clock. What forgotten conversation between human spirit and the universe is still waiting for us to hear in these stones? In a quiet scriptorium, lit only by a single candle, a monk's steady hand traces a line across a vellum chart. He is not mapping a coastline or plotting a trade route. His focus is fixed on the precise path of a star as it wheels through the black vault of night. For him, this celestial motion is not just an object of study. It is the first line of a blueprint, a divine instruction for where to place the foundation stone of a new abbey church. This was the profound conviction that guided builders for centuries. They were not merely constructing shelters or monuments. They were attempting a sacred act of mirroring to build a heaven on earth. Their cathedrals, castles, and even entire cities were designed as terrestrial reflections of a perfect cosmic, deep philosophical and theological well. Ancient Greek thinkers like Plato spoke of a universe built on perfect geometric forms and harmonic ratios, a concept that resonated through the ages. For medieval Christian thinkers, this idea fused with scripture. If God created the heavens to declare His glory, then what greater act of worship could there be than to echo that celestial architecture in stone? Aligning a building with the sun on a saint's day, or orienting its axis toward the rising point of a significant star, was a way of weaving the fabric of the building into the very tapestry of creation. It made the structure a participant in the divine rhythm of time itself. As historian John North emphasized, these alignments served a brilliantly dual purpose. They were profoundly practical. The sunlight piercing a specific window at dawn on the winter solstice was a reliable annual calendar etched in light, marking the year's turn for a community that might own few written ones. But their function ran far deeper than simple timekeeping. Each alignment was a statement of faith, a permanent prayer in geometry and astronomy. It declared that human endeavor at its highest could aspire to mirror cosmic perfection. This seamless blend of what we would now separate into science and spirituality is the essential key. It is the bedrock understanding we must carry forward. To see these structures merely as buildings is to miss their true purpose. They are frozen dialogues with the universe, and we are only now beginning to listen to what they have been saying all along. The principles of this cosmic architecture did not begin with the medieval cathedral. They echo from a far more ancient dawn. On a frost-covered hillside in Ireland stands a structure so old it makes the Great Pyramid seem like recent arrivals. Newgrange is a massive circular mound of earth and stone built over 5,000 years ago. Its purpose was deeply sacred, a resting place and a monument to eternity. But its builders embedded within it a secret of breathtaking precision, an alignment that speaks across millennia. Deep within the mound runs a long, narrow stone passage. At its end lies a central chamber, a space meant for quiet remembrance. Above the entrance, hidden in the structure, is a small opening called a roof box. For most of the year, this inner sanctum lies in absolute darkness, but for a few precious minutes around sunrise on the winter solstice, something miraculous happens. As the sun crests the distant horizon on the year's shortest day, a thin, brilliant beam of light pierces through that roof box. It travels down the entire length of the 60-foot passage, a corridor of stone, to finally flood the central chamber with golden light. This was not an accident, it is engineering of sublime intent. The passage is aligned with exquisite care to capture that single, low arc of the solstice sun. For the community that built it, this event was layered with profound meaning. The winter solstice marks the sun's symbolic death and rebirth, the moment the days begin to grow longer again. To have the sun itself enter this deepest chamber was a powerful symbol of life conquering darkness, of renewal promised even in the depth of winter. It connected the cycle of the heavens directly to the cycle of life and what lies beyond. This Neolithic masterpiece is in many ways the purest prototype. It shows us that the desire to anchor human sacred space to celestial events is a timeless human impulse. Medieval builders, though separated by thousands of years and vast cultural differences, were working within this same profound tradition. They too sought to capture light as a divine messenger, to mark sacred time with architecture, and to build structures that served as bridges between the earthly and the eternal. Newgrange stands as a silent, powerful testament that the language of stone and stars is one of humanity's oldest. The long stone passage of Newgrange ends in a chamber of profound silence. Centuries later, across a transformed Europe, that same principle of sacred alignment was being translated into a new and monumental language. Step through the arched doorway of any great medieval cathedral, and you are not simply entering a building. You are walking a deliberate solar path, one laid down by faith and geometry. The most fundamental and widespread of all these celestial alignments is the cardinal orientation of the church itself. From the smallest village chapel to the grandest metropolitan cathedral, an almost universal rule dictated their footprint. The main body of the church was laid out along an east-west axis, with the high altar placed at the eastern end. This was far more than architectural convention. It was a profound theological statement in stone. East, the direction of the rising sun, was symbolically charged. It represented the dawn of creation, the light of Christ, and the hope of resurrection. For medieval Christians, it also pointed spiritually toward Jerusalem, the holy city. By facing the altar eastward, every celebration of the Mass, every prayer uttered in that space, was physically oriented toward this divine light. Liturgical texts of the time, like the Rationale Divinorum Officium, explicitly explain this symbolism. The church building was understood as a microcosm of the world, with the altar in the east representing paradise. The congregation, gathered in the nave to the west, embodied humanity journeying from darkness into light. This alignment was so crucial that it was ceremonially set at the very beginning of construction. In a ritual known as the orienting ceremony, a bishop or master builder would use the rising sun on the feast day of the church's patron saint to determine the exact line of the east wall. They did this without magnetic compasses, which were unreliable for true north, and without modern tools. They used gnomons, simple stakes that cast shadows, and painstaking observation of the sun's path across several days to find true east. The challenge was immense, yet the accuracy they achieved is often startling. This alignment did more than guide the builders. It oriented the entire spiritual life of the community. From the moment a peasant entered the dim nave, their path forward toward the illuminated altar was a physical reenactment of a spiritual journey. The sunlight streaming through the eastern windows during morning mass was not incidental. It was a participant in the liturgy, a visible sign of the divine presence they sought. In this way, the church building itself became a daily, silent teacher of faith, using the most reliable clock humanity has ever known, the sun, to point constantly toward hope and renewal. But the sun was not the only celestial traveler these builders sought to honor. Sometimes the alignment they pursued was not a single point of light, but a straight and mysterious line drawn across the very face of the land. To understand this, we must leave the cathedral and walk into the open English countryside. Here, a concept emerges that blurs the line between archaeology, folklore, and celestial mystery, the idea of ley lines. Our focus is one of the most famous and striking examples, the St. Michael alignment. It is said to run in a dead straight line for nearly 300 miles across southern England, connecting ancient sites almost all dedicated to the Archangel Michael. The line begins at a rocky tidal island off the coast of Cornwall called St. Michael's Mount, crowned by a medieval monastery. It then passes through a series of prominent hills, like the dramatic terraced pyramid of Glastonbury Tor, and ends at another coastal point in Norfolk. On a map, the precision is startling. The theory was popularized in the 1920s by an amateur antiquarian named Alfred Watkins. He proposed that our prehistoric ancestors created these straight tracks as primitive trade routes or pilgrimage paths, marked by mounds, stones, and later, churches built upon those same sacred spots. Enthusiasts of the idea suggest these lines might follow telluric energy, or more relevant to our story, align with specific solar or lunar risings, turning the landscape itself into a vast astronomical instrument. The St. Michael line is particularly compelling because many of the sites along it have clear historical and spiritual significance, often associated with prehistoric earthworks later Christianized. Modern archaeologists and historians, however, approach the idea with deep skepticism. They point out that with so many ancient sites scattered across Britain, statistically, some will inevitably fall into a straight line purely by chance. They argue there is no material evidence, no excavated pathway or construction marker, to prove these lines were intentionally built as navigable routes. The alignment, they suggest, is a pattern we see because we are looking for it, a meaningful coincidence shaped by human psychology's love for order. So where does the truth lie? It likely exists in a fascinating middle ground. While the idea of a prehistoric energy grid may belong to modern myth-making, the persistent reuse of certain elevated, spiritually charged locations is undeniable. A hill like Glastonbury Tor, visible for miles, would naturally attract ceremonial activity for millennia. That later Christians would build a St. Michael chapel on that same high place, associating the Archangel with high places and solar conquest, is a profound continuity of sacred geography. Whether the straight line itself was an intentional, surveyed feat of ancient engineering or a beautiful accident of history, the result is the same. It creates a narrative in the landscape, a story written in hilltops and stone that invites us to see connections between earth and sky, between pagan past and Christian present. It challenges us to ask a deeper question. Does an alignment need to be physically constructed to be meaningful, or can meaning arise from the patterns we and our ancestors perceive in the world? The St. Michael line, whether ancient map or modern metaphor, reminds us that the human desire to draw order from the cosmos is a powerful force, one that can shape not just buildings but our very perception of the land itself. The debate over lines on a map fades into silence within the walls of a French cathedral, where light itself becomes a precisely calibrated instrument. Chartres Cathedral is more than a building of stone and glass. It is a colossal machine for capturing and transforming sunlight, engineered with a precision that still inspires awe. Among its many hidden alignments, one stands out for its elegant simplicity and profound public purpose. Deep within the nave, the long central aisle where worshippers walk, a single, unassuming stone is set into the floor. For most of the year, it is just another slab underfoot, unnoticed by the thousands of visitors. But on the day of the summer solstice, this stone becomes the focal point of a celestial event. High above, in the intricate tracery of a cathedral window, a specific pane of glass is positioned with exacting care. as the sun reaches its highest peak in the sky at midday on the longest day of the year, a brilliant, concentrated beam of sunlight pierces the colored glass. It descends through the dusty, incense-laden air of the cavernous interior, a solid shaft of illuminated dust, to land with perfect accuracy upon that one stone on the floor. This was not a happy accident. It was the culmination of immense planning by the master mason and his team. To achieve this, they had to perform a series of complex calculations entirely through geometry and observation. They needed to know the exact altitude of the sun at local noon on the solstice. They had to calculate the angle at which light would pass through that specific window opening, and then project that angle down through the vast empty space of the unfinished nave to determine the exact point where it would strike the floor. Only then could they mark that spot and lay the stone. The margin for error over such a distance was vanishingly small. The result was a public astronomical clock of breathtaking beauty. For the medieval community, many of whom could not read a written calendar, this annual event was a reliable, spectacular marker of time. It signaled the turning of the year, the peak of summer light, and the coming harvest. But its meaning was layered far deeper than simple timekeeping. In the context of the cathedral, this event was a live demonstration of divine order. It showed the congregation that the laws governing the heavens, the sun's majestic path, were in perfect harmony with the sacred geometry of their house of worship. God's cosmic clockwork was made visible right there in their midst. The sunlight, filtered through biblical scenes in stained glass, carried narrative and divinity with it before touching the earth. This seamless integration of a natural phenomenon into the heart of Christian ritual was a powerful theological statement. It declared that the natural world was not separate from the spiritual realm, but its most eloquent testament. The cathedral was not a shelter from the cosmos. It was a lens through which to see the cosmos as holy. While Chartres used a single beam for a public spectacle, other timekeeping was a quieter, more personal discipline. In the cloistered calm of Westminster Abbey's chapter house, the floor itself holds a secret. Etched into the stone pavement is a sophisticated 13th century instrument, a mass dial. This is not a grand vertical sundial on a wall, but a horizontal one, its geometry laid flat for the monks who walked here. Its design is deceptively simple. A central hole, now filled, once held a metal rod called a gnomon. Radiating out from this point are a series of carefully inscribed lines like spokes on a wheel. Each line corresponds to a specific time of day, calibrated to the sun's changing path across the sky through the seasons. The monks would use this tool to mark the canonical hours, the set times for prayer that structured their entire existence. From matins in the deep night to vespers at dusk, the sun's moving shadow across these stone lines dictated the rhythm of their devotion. This was practical astronomy woven into the very fabric of daily life. The accuracy required was significant. The dial's creator had to account for the Abbey's latitude, the tilt of the Earth's axis, and the sun's varying altitude. A mistake in the angle of a single line could throw off the timing of a prayer office. This embedded clock ensured the entire community moved in synchronized harmony, their spiritual routine anchored to the cosmic clockwork overhead. It transforms our understanding of the space. The chapter house was not just a meeting room, it was a functional observatory. The silent, passing shadow was a call to prayer more reliable than any human voice. It exemplifies how, in the medieval world, the observation of the heavens was never a purely abstract science. It was a spiritual technology, a means of aligning human intention with divine order, one measured shadow at a time. High on a sun-baked hill in southern Italy, a fortress of pure geometry commands the horizon. Castel del Monte, built by the Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II in the 13th century, defies all expectations of a medieval castle. There are no sprawling outer walls, no moat, no strategic battlements for defense. Instead, it presents a form of stark, intellectual perfection, a perfect octagon of golden limestone with an octagonal tower at each of its 8 corners. This is not a structure born from military necessity, but from a mind obsessed with the hidden order of the universe. Frederick II was a ruler of legendary contradictions, a Christian emperor deeply versed in Islamic science and ancient Greek philosophy. His court was a melting pot of scholars from across the Mediterranean, and Castel del Monte stands as the ultimate expression of his personal cosmology, a puzzle box carved in stone. The choice of the octagon is the first and greatest clue. In sacred geometry, the octagon holds profound symbolic power. It represents a transitional form, the shape between the square, symbolizing the earth, and the circle, symbolizing the heavens and eternity. Baptismal fonts and some early Christian churches were often octagonal, symbolizing the believer's transition from earthly life to spiritual rebirth. For Frederick, a shape this charged was a deliberate statement, a declaration that his palace was a bridge between worldly power and cosmic wisdom. But the alignment of this shape is where the true mystery deepens. Researchers have long studied how the castle's precise orientation interacts with the sun. Its 8 sides and 8 towers are not placed randomly. Compelling theories suggest the entire structure is aligned so that its shadow patterns and the sunlight falling through its windows mark the solstices and equinoxes with mathematical precision. On these key days of the solar year, the sun's rays may have entered specific apertures to illuminate particular rooms or architectural features, turning the castle into a colossal annual calendar. Other interpretations look to classical antiquity, suggesting the 8 towers correspond to the 8 winds of the ancient Greek compass, as described by scholars like Vitruvius. This would make the castle a giant stone wind rose, aligning imperial authority with mastery over the natural world. The truth may weave both ideas together. For Frederick, there was no separation between astronomy, geometry, and royal power. To design a building that literally captured the sun's path was to demonstrate a ruler's harmony with the fundamental laws governing creation. Each perfectly cut stone, each echoing octagonal courtyard, speaks of a mind that saw the cosmos as a book written in number, shape, and light. Castel del Monte refuses to give up all its secrets. Was it a hunting lodge, a scholarly retreat, or a monumental symbol of imperial ambition? Its lack of obvious function only amplifies its purpose as a permanent idea. It is architecture as a frozen theorem, a declaration that true power lies not in force, but in understanding the silent, geometric language of the heavens. From the geometric perfection of Castel del Monte, we travel to a landscape of raw necessity and holy war. Perched on a lonely hill in what is now Syria, the fortress of Krak des Chevaliers is a monument to sheer defensive power. Its colossal walls and intimidating towers were engineered to withstand the fiercest sieges. Yet within this machine of war, there is compelling evidence of a quieter, more watchful science. High on those silent battlements, long after the last Crusader century has gone, the stones themselves seem to remember a different kind of watch. Certain narrow window slits and strategically placed apertures in the fortress's towers align not toward approaching enemies on the horizon, but upward toward the fixed tapestry of the night sky. Researchers studying the site have proposed that these openings were deliberate astronomical sightlines. One theory suggests an alignment with the brilliant star Sirius, the brightest in our night sky. Another points to Vega, a key navigational star. For the Knights Hospitaller who held this fortress, this integration of astronomy would have been a natural fusion of their dual identity. They were both a monastic order bound by prayer and the canonical hours, and a military brotherhood dependent on precise timing for campaigns, communications, and managing supply caravans across treacherous terrain. Knowing the exact date was a logistical necessity. The changing position of a specific star at a specific hour, viewed through a fixed stone window, could act as a reliable celestial calendar, marking the change of seasons far more accurately than any portable timepiece of the era. The dry summer months dictated the movement of armies, while the coming of autumn rains influenced the planting and harvesting that sustained the garrison. A star observed just above a distant mountain peak on a certain night could signal that it was time to send for reinforcements or to harvest the grain stores. This transforms our understanding of the fortress. It was not just a shield against human foes, but an observatory locked in a silent dialogue with the cosmos. The sentries pacing the walls were likely trained to read the heavens as diligently as they scanned the desert roads. In this place where faith and force were inseparable, the stars provided a constant, unchanging guide, a celestial map for both the soul's devotion and the army's survival, written in light upon a wartime sky. The silent watch of desert stars gives way to a stone sky carved in meticulous detail. In the quiet Scottish village of Rosslyn Chapel's interior is a breathtaking paradox. From the outside, it is a modest, sturdy structure of the 15th century. Step inside, and the very air seems charged with a silent, stone symphony. Every surface, from arches to pillars, is alive with carving, a dense tapestry of stone foliage, biblical scenes, and enigmatic symbols that has fueled centuries of speculation. To look up is to be transfixed. The chapel's famous vaulted ceiling is a masterpiece of late Gothic stonework, often described as a frozen celestial garden. Intricate stone flowers, stars, and geometric patterns bloom across the ribs of the vaults, creating a canopy that feels less like a roof and more like a representation of the firmament itself. This is where popular legend often rushes in, whispering of hidden Templar treasures or lost scrolls buried beneath the floor. But the deeper, more fascinating truth lies not in what might be buried, but in what is permanently on display overhead. Scholarly research, moving beyond the myths, suggests the chapel's geometry is a deliberate and complex astronomical text. The most famous feature, the ornately spiraled apprentice pillar, stands as a central anchor. Some researchers propose its design encodes sacred geometric ratios related to the harmonic intervals of the musical scale, a physical representation of the medieval concept of the music of the spheres, the idea that planetary motions create an inaudible celestial harmony. The pillar's very placement may be significant. Studies by historians like Ashley Cowie have examined the chapel's orientation and its narrow windows, suggesting specific alignments were built to allow the light of Polaris, the steadfast North Star, to penetrate the interior on certain nights, illuminating specific carvings or points on the floor. This transforms the space from a simple chapel into a sophisticated mnemonic device. In an age before widespread literacy, complex esoteric knowledge about astronomy, geometry, and theology could be encoded into architecture. A specific star carved at a certain junction in the vault, when touched by the light of its real celestial counterpart, would act as a memory trigger, a visual lesson in the connection between heaven and earth. The countless botanical carvings, long thought to be purely decorative, may also be part of this code. Some researchers suggest they represent a stellar map, with different plants symbolizing different constellations visible in the Scottish night sky of the 15th century. Whether intended as a teaching tool for initiated craftsmen, a personal devotional project by its builder William Sinclair, or a grand artistic statement of cosmic order, the effect is undeniable. Rosslyn Chapel does not merely point to the stars, it recreates them in stone. It is a building designed to be read as much as worshipped within, a permanent, silent lecture on the medieval belief that the beauty of the heavens could and should be mirrored in the work of human hands. The stone sky of Rosslyn Chapel compels us to look up, but the ambition of medieval planners did not stop at the cathedral vault. their vision expanded to encompass entire communities, shaping the very ground upon which cities were born. The Hanseatic city of Lübeck in northern Germany presents a masterclass in this urban-scale celestial thinking. Founded in the 12th century, Lübeck was not a haphazard collection of buildings. It was a deliberate act of world-building, a new Jerusalem designed for commerce and faith, laid out according to a profound sense of cosmic order. Its foundational grid, a pattern of main streets and marketplaces, reveals an alignment that transcends simple practicality. The city's primary axis, running from the Holstentor Gate to the cathedral, is oriented with remarkable precision. Research suggests this alignment was set to capture the path of the sun, particularly during the summer months when the Hanseatic trading season was at its peak. This was not accidental. By aligning the main thoroughfares with the sun's trajectory, the planners achieved two brilliant objectives. First, they harnessed the sun for pure, mundane utility. The long summer sunlight would flood the broad market squares and main streets, illuminating the goods of merchants, warming the public spaces, and creating an environment of vitality and activity essential for a thriving trade hub. It was a form of passive solar urban design centuries before the term existed, but the second purpose ran far deeper into the realm of sacred geometry and symbolic harmony. Medieval thinkers saw the city as a microcosm of the divinely ordered universe. To lay out its streets in alignment with the heavens was to declare that Lübeck itself participated in that cosmic perfection. The main marketplace, often the physical and spiritual heart of a medieval town, became a kind of earthly counterpart to the celestial order above. The regularity of the grid, intersecting at right angles, reflected the medieval love for geometric harmony, which they believed echoed the mind of the Creator. This layout created a predictable, orderly environment where commerce could flourish under a perceived heavenly blessing. It shaped the daily experience of every citizen. A merchant unloading his wares in the sun-drenched square, a housewife walking to the church along a bright, wide street. Their lives were literally guided by this solar blueprint. The city itself became a machine for living in harmony with natural law, a physical manifestation of the belief that human society, at its best, should mirror the stable, luminous order of the cosmos. Lübeck's success as a powerhouse of the Hanseatic League may have had pragmatic economic roots, but its enduring form whispers of a foundational philosophy. It reminds us that for the medieval mind, prosperity and divine favor were two sides of the same coin, and the most successful city plan was one that invited the heavens to walk its streets. The orderly streets of Lübeck, planned for the sun, speak of a world in harmony. But the cosmos also commands a more elemental and dramatic rhythm, one not of light but of water. Off the coast of Normandy, the silhouette of Mont Saint-Michel rises from a vast flat plain of sand, a granite island crowned with a monastery that seems to pierce the sky. For most visitors, its majesty is visual, but to understand its true nature, you must listen for a sound absent from city streets, the roar of the fastest tides in continental Europe. This was not merely a picturesque setting, it was a geographical fact that transformed the mount into a colossal, functioning lunar clock. The island's accessibility is governed by an immutable celestial dance, the gravitational pull of the moon. Twice each day, the sea retreats for miles, exposing a dangerous, shimmering causeway of sand. Then, with astonishing speed, it returns, surrounding the mount with deep water and cutting it off completely from the mainland. This cycle of connection and isolation is not daily in a simple sense. It is tied to the lunar phases, with the most extreme tides, the spring tides, occurring at the new and full moon. For the Benedictine monks who built their abbey here, this was far more than a natural moat for defense, though it served that purpose brilliantly. They would have interpreted this rhythmic isolation through a profound spiritual lens. Their rule called for a balance between communal prayer and solitary contemplation, between engagement with the world and retreat from it. The very island beneath their feet physically enacted this sacred rhythm. At low tide, pilgrims and supplies could approach, connecting the monastic community to the earthly realm. At high tide, especially during the powerful spring tides, the mount became a true island of solitude, a fortress of silence enforced by the sea itself. This forced seclusion, dictated by the moon, created perfect conditions for uninterrupted prayer and meditation. It was as if the lunar cycle itself was regulating their spiritual discipline, pulling them into retreat and then releasing them back into connection. The architecture amplified this metaphor. The Abbey church sits at the very summit, the highest point closest to heaven, while the village clings to the slopes below. The climb from the tidal flats to the church spire is a physical and spiritual ascent from the mutable, cyclical world of water and earth to the perceived eternal realm of the spirit. The monks did not just observe the tides, they lived within their tempo, their daily and monthly routines harmonized with a celestial pulse. Their isolation was not a hardship, but a divine appointment, a periodic reminder that the soul, too, must regularly withdraw from the world's chatter to hear a deeper, quieter voice. In this way, Mont Saint-Michel transcends being a building aligned to the stars. It is an entire landscape aligned to the moon, a place where the granite of faith was set directly into the tidal clock of the cosmos. Justice in medieval England was not always dispensed in open courts under the public sun. Deep within the sprawling complex of Westminster Palace, a room existed where power convened in a more concentrated, shadowed form, the Star Chamber. Its very name, echoing down the centuries, carries a weight of both dread and celestial mystery. This was not a place of common law, but a prerogative court of the monarch, handling cases of perjury, corruption, and riots, often with swift and severe authority. The popular image is of a secretive, oppressive tribunal, and its later history in the 16th and 17th centuries certainly earned that reputation. But the origins of its name point to a far more symbolic, and perhaps literally starry, beginning. The most enduring theory, supported by antiquarians like John Stowe in the 16th century, is that the chamber's ceiling was once decorated with a pattern of gilded stars against a deep blue background. While no definitive visual record survives from its medieval construction, the name Star Chamber appears in official records as early as the 14th century. This was not merely decorative whimsy. In the medieval worldview, stars represented divine order, the unchanging law of the cosmos as set by the Creator. To hold a court of the king's justice beneath a ceiling of stars was a potent piece of political theater. It visually declared that the authority exercised in that room was not merely human or arbitrary, but was itself a reflection of a higher heavenly order. The king's justice was, in theory, administered under the same cosmic laws that guided the planets. This symbolism served a crucial function, legitimizing the chamber's often extra-legal proceedings by framing them as part of a divine mandate. The room's possible orientation may have deepened this metaphor. While its exact alignment is lost to the many rebuildings of the palace, the concept is clear. If the chamber was, like many significant rooms, oriented with some consideration of the sun's path, the interplay of natural light with those painted stars would have been dramatic. Sunlight streaming through a high window could have made the gilded stars gleam, creating a moment where celestial symbolism and earthly power were visibly fused. This transforms our understanding of the space. It was designed to psychologically frame the proceedings. For a petitioner or an accused person standing in that room, the message was overwhelming. You were not just before a panel of royal counselors, you were standing under the very eyes of heaven, subject to a justice that claimed to mirror the perfection of the cosmos. This invocation of celestial oversight was a masterstroke of medieval statecraft, weaving astronomy into the architecture of authority. It reminds us that in an age of profound belief, the most effective power was often that which could convincingly claim to be not an invention of man, but a humble reflection of the stars. The gilded stars of Westminster spoke of justice under heaven, but in the sun-drenched courtyards of Al-Andalus, the stars were partners in a precise science of devotion and survival. High in the Sierra Nevada mountains of southern Spain, the Alhambra Fortress Palace stands as a masterpiece of Islamic architecture, a jewel of water, geometry, and light built during the long centuries of the Reconquista. Here, the integration of astronomy was not a symbolic afterthought, but a fundamental principle woven into the very fabric of military and spiritual life. Islamic scholars of the medieval period were the inheritors and brilliant expanders of ancient Greek, Persian, and Indian astronomical knowledge. For them, observing the heavens was a sacred duty, essential for determining the 5 daily prayer times, the direction of Mecca, and the dates of the lunar Islamic calendar. This sophisticated science, known as Ilm al-Miqat, found physical expression in the architecture of power. Throughout the Alhambra, one finds carefully positioned miradors or observation towers. These were not merely for enjoying the view, they were high-precision instruments. Their narrow windows and aligned sightlines were engineered to frame specific celestial events. A mirador might be oriented so that the first gleam of the morning sun, or the evening appearance of a particular star like Sirius, would fall directly through an aperture, signaling the time for Fajr or Maghrib prayers with impeccable accuracy. The officials responsible for this were the muwakkits, the timekeepers, who were often accomplished astronomers themselves. Their role was vital, transforming the palace from a royal residence into a functioning observatory. But the alignments served more than ritual. In a fortress on the frontier of a religious and territorial conflict, precise timekeeping was a military asset. Coordinating patrols, managing sentry changes under cover of darkness, and timing communications across vast distances all relied on a shared celestial clock. The sun's path, marked by shadows moving across calibrated courtyards or through specific arched windows, provided that reliable, unassailable standard. This celestial engineering reached its poetic peak in the famed Court of the Lions. The 12 marble lions supporting the central fountain are often interpreted through numerology and symbolism, but some researchers see a deeper layer. The courtyard's intricate design and the placement of its columns have been analyzed for potential alignments that would use sunlight and shadow to mark the hours of the day or significant dates in the solar year. Whether marking prayer time or orchestrating the movements of a palace, the effect was a profound harmony. It created an environment where daily life, governance, and worship moved in sync with the cosmic order, a tangible expression of the Islamic concept of submitting to the divine rhythm of creation. This tradition of celestial integration was not an isolated wonder. Through the translation of Arabic texts in cities like Toledo and the cultural exchange along the frontier, this advanced astronomical knowledge flowed directly into Christian Europe. It equipped later medieval scholars and builders with more precise tools and tables, directly influencing the design of cathedrals and the revival of science in the West. The Alhambra's silent stones remind us that the dialogue between architecture and the heavens was a universal language, spoken with different accents but shared by all who looked up and sought to bring a measure of that infinite order down to earth. The Alhambra's courtyards were precise celestial clocks, but a far older and more rugged form of navigation was being practiced under the vast, open skies of the North Atlantic. Centuries before Gothic spires pierced the clouds, Viking explorers were reading the heavens from the decks of their longships, using a knowledge so vital they etched it into the very land itself. Across the remote coasts of Scandinavia, Iceland, and Greenland, you can still find mysterious arrangements of stones and solitary, man-made mounds rising from the tundra. These are not grand monuments in the traditional sense. They are something arguably more fascinating, a form of astronomical infrastructure born from sheer necessity, a pragmatic language of earth and stone written for survival. For a people undertaking voyages across featureless ocean stretches where landmarks vanished for days, traditional coastal piloting was impossible. Success, and life itself, depended on a sophisticated blend of celestial observation and dead reckoning. The Norse sagas and later medieval texts like the Icelandic Landnámabók hint at their methods, mentioning the use of a solskugafjol or sun shadow board, a primitive but effective solar compass. But on land, they needed permanent reference points. This is where the mounds and stone settings enter the story. A solitary, prominent burial mound or a carefully placed cairn on a headland could serve a dual purpose. It was a memorial, a resting place honoring an individual, but its location was chosen with a navigator's eye. Researchers propose that these mounds were positioned to act as crude but highly effective alignment markers. A sailor departing from a known settlement would line up two such mounds on the shore behind him, creating a back sight. As he sailed away, keeping those two landmarks in a specific alignment, one directly above the other or spaced a certain width apart, would give him a true bearing, a straight line out to sea. To return, he simply reversed the process, sailing until the mounds realigned in the opposite order. This simple technique provided a reliable, repeatable vector for crossing treacherous stretches like the Denmark Strait between Iceland and Greenland. The astronomy came in their calibration. It is believed these sight lines were not set to arbitrary points on the horizon, but to key solar events. A mound alignment that pointed directly to the sunrise on the summer solstice or the sunset on the equinox created a permanent, culturally shared compass rose etched into the landscape. On the open water, when landmarks faded, they switched to the stars. The Norse are known to have used the constant, low circle of Polaris, the North Star, and likely other circumpolar stars that never set, to maintain latitude. A stone setting on a Greenlandic fjord, oriented to a specific star's rising point, would become a fixed celestial signpost telling a captain, "Steer here when that star touches the mountain." This transforms our understanding of these lonely mounds. They were not just monuments to the departed. They were functional components in a vast, decentralized navigation network, a system that linked community, memory, and the cosmos. Each mound was both a grave and a guide, a stone library holding the directional knowledge that allowed an entire culture to expand across the world's most hostile seas. It represents astronomy stripped to its most essential form, not as a symbol of power, but as a partner in the courageous, daily act of finding a way home. The Viking stone compasses spoke a language of survival, but in the royal heart of France, light was taught to sing a hymn. Just north of medieval Paris, the Abbey of Saint-Denis rises not as a fortress, but as a vessel deliberately designed to dissolve stone into radiance. This was the revolutionary vision of one man, Abbot Suger, in the 12th century. He is often called the father of Gothic architecture, and his driving principle was a theological idea made physical. For Suger, light was the closest earthly manifestation of the divine. He wrote passionately that dull, material things could be elevated by sacred light, allowing the soul to rise from the material world to the immaterial truth of God. This was not a metaphor, it was a building instruction. Under his direction, the old dark Romanesque walls of Saint-Denis were pierced with vast, soaring windows filled with stained glass, creating the first truly luminous Gothic space. But these windows were far more than colorful biblical storybooks. They were sophisticated, celestial instruments, meticulously engineered light-filtering mechanisms. Each pane of colored glass acted like a lens, transforming raw sunlight into a specific quality of sacred illumination. The placement of each window was calculated with the sun's annual journey in mind. A window on the eastern end of the choir, for instance, would catch the low, direct rays of the morning sun. The glass there might be dominated by fiery reds and brilliant golds, so that on the feast day of a martyr, the first light of dawn would flood the altar with a crimson glow, visually representing sacrifice and spiritual fire. Conversely, a window on the northern side, which receives softer, more diffuse light throughout the year, might be filled with cooler blues and greens. This steady, serene light could illuminate a chapel dedicated to the Virgin Mary, bathing her statue in a perpetual, gentle azure associated with purity and heaven. The entire liturgical year was choreographed in light and color. Suger and his master glaziers understood the solar calendar intimately. They knew that on the summer solstice, the sun would ride high, its beams reaching deep into the nave through specific clerestory windows, perhaps those depicting scenes of creation or the heavenly Jerusalem. On the winter solstice, the low-angle sun would strike the rose window of the western facade, setting the entire wheel of glass ablaze for a brief, glorious moment as worshippers gathered for Vespers, a promise of returning light in the deepest dark. This turned the stone skeleton of the basilica into a dynamic, living calendar. A monk walking the ambulatory on the feast of Saint-Denis himself would experience a different quality of light, a different set of colored shadows falling across the shrine than on an ordinary Tuesday. The building itself participated in the celebration, its architecture responding to the cosmos to enhance the sacred story. This was theology you could feel on your skin, a warmth of red or a coolness of blue that taught a lesson more powerfully than any sermon. Abbot Suger's great innovation was to realize that architecture could do more than point to the heavens. It could become a lens, capturing the sun's eternal language and translating it, hour by hour, feast by feast, into a visible poetry of faith for all who stepped inside. The luminous theology of Saint-Denis transformed stone into colored light, but another order of warrior monks built their houses of worship to a very different and deeply enigmatic blueprint. Scattered across Europe, from London to the fields of France, stand the distinctive round churches of the Knights Templar. Their most famous survivor, the Temple Church in London, presents a visitor with a striking architectural puzzle. Why would a military order famed for its prowess on the battlefield choose to build not in the soaring Gothic style of the day, but in a solemn, circular or octagonal form? The answer begins with a powerful act of symbolic replication. The primary model for these round churches was the holiest site in Christendom, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. At its heart lay the rotunda, a great circular structure built over the traditional tomb of Christ. For the Templars, whose very purpose was the protection of pilgrims traveling to that sacred city, building their own churches in this shape was a profound statement. It brought a piece of Jerusalem home, creating a permanent architectural memory of the central shrine of their faith. A knight praying in the London Temple Church could, in a sense, feel he was standing in the spiritual shadow of the empty tomb, an experience designed to reinforce his sacred vows. The octagonal form used in other Templar sites carries its own layered meaning. As we saw with Castel del Monte, the octagon symbolizes transition and resurrection, the shape between the earthly square and the heavenly circle. It was a geometry deeply associated with baptisteries and martyria, buildings celebrating spiritual rebirth, for an order whose members saw themselves as living in a perpetual state of holy sacrifice. This shape was a perfect fit. But the mystery of these structures deepens when we move beyond pure symbolism. The precise geometry and orientation of these round churches invite speculation about a more practical, celestial function. Some researchers propose that the circular layout, with its uniform walls and carefully placed windows, could have served as a kind of observatory. A single, narrow window aligned to true north, for instance, would have provided a fixed sightline to Polaris, the constant star. Another window facing due east could mark the equinox sunrise. Within the quiet, acoustically resonant space of the round nave, these alignments would have created specific beams of light that moved across the stone floor with the seasons. This would have provided the order with a reliable, secretive calendar. For the Templars, precise timekeeping was not merely spiritual, it was a cornerstone of their immense temporal power. They functioned as the first true international bankers, managing vast assets and a sophisticated system of credit for pilgrims. A pilgrim could deposit funds at a Templar preceptory in Paris and receive a coded letter of credit to withdraw the same value in Jerusalem. The security and smooth operation of this financial network depended on impeccable record-keeping and synchronized dates across continents. An accurate solar calendar, embedded in the architecture of their own churches, would have been a formidable administrative tool, allowing them to calculate interest, manage contracts, and coordinate the sailing schedules of their own ships with uncanny precision. Furthermore, their role in guiding and protecting pilgrims required knowledge of the solar year to plan the dangerous overland journeys to the Holy Land, which were only feasible during certain seasons. The theories of hidden astronomical knowledge tie into the enduring legends of the Order's secret rites and rumored discoveries beneath the Temple Mount. While much of this is shrouded in myth, the architectural evidence is tangible. The round church is a perfect fusion of form and function. It was a powerful symbol of their connection to Jerusalem, a potential celestial instrument for practical governance, and a private, sacred space that set them apart from the established church. In these silent, geometric chapels, the lines between prayer, banking, and astronomy blur completely, revealing an order that understood power not just as martial strength, but as control over the most fundamental currencies of the medieval world: faith, time, and light itself. The circular logic of the Templars leads us to a space of perfect, square serenity. Within the protective walls of any great monastery, you would find a sanctuary within a sanctuary, the cloister garden. Enclosed by a covered walkway of graceful stone arches, this open square of earth was far more than a quiet place for a monk to stroll. It was a meticulously designed model of the entire created universe, a theological diagram you could walk through. The garden's form was a profound exercise in sacred geometry. The four covered walks or alleys surrounding the central plot were rich with symbolic possibility. They could represent the four seasons, the cyclical nature of time ordained by God. They might stand for the four classical elements: earth, air, fire, and water, from which all material things were believed to be composed. Or they could echo the four rivers said to flow from the Garden of Eden, a reminder of paradise lost and the hoped-for paradise regained. This quadrangular frame created a boundary between the chaos of the outside world and the perfect order within. At the very heart of this symbolic landscape, a focal point anchored the entire design. Often, this was a simple stone well, a source of life-giving water. In other cloisters, it might be a single, carefully tended fruit tree. This central feature was not chosen at random. It represented the axis mundi, the world axis, a concept found in countless ancient cosmologies. This was the symbolic center of the world, the point where heaven and earth met, the still pivot around which the cosmos turned. For a monk meditating here, the well was not just for drawing water. It was a spiritual conduit, a reminder that divine grace, like water, sprang from the depths to nourish the soul. The tree was not merely for shade, but a living echo of the tree of life in Eden. The orientation of the entire cloister within the monastery complex was itself a cosmological statement. While the church proper was aligned east-west for the rising sun, the cloister garden was often situated to the south of the church, bathing it in sunlight. This placement was practical for growing the herbs used in medicine, cooking, and sacred rituals, but it was also symbolic. The south was associated with the sun at its height, with light, warmth, and the fullness of creation. To walk from the cool, shadowed church into the sunlit cloister was to move from the contemplative mystery of the divine to the illuminated order of God's handiwork. Every plant in this garden was a verse in a silent scripture. Monastic herbals, the books that catalogued plants and their uses, often attributed spiritual meanings to them. Rosemary was for remembrance, lavender for purity, sage for wisdom. Tending these plants was an act of devotion, a participation in the ongoing work of creation. As the monk weeded, watered, and harvested, he was quite literally ordering his own inner landscape while tending a miniature model of the cosmos. The cloister walkway itself, with its repetitive arches and columns, framed this living model like a picture. A monk pacing this circuit in prayer was not just exercising his legs, he was orbiting the center of his symbolic world, his rhythmic steps a physical prayer that mirrored the orderly motion of the planets. In this quiet square of earth and stone, the vast, intimidating cosmos was brought down to a human, manageable scale. It was a place where theology became tangible, where the abstract concept of divine order could be touched, smelled, and walked in a slow, mindful circle. This was the ultimate purpose of the celestial alignment in medieval thought. It was not about controlling the heavens, but about understanding humanity's place within them. The cloister garden taught that by creating a small, perfect order on earth, the human soul could learn to resonate with the grand, perfect order of the stars. Rothenburg ob der Tauber's stone walls encircle a town that seems lifted from a storybook, a perfectly preserved medieval world. Yet within its charming, timber-framed streets lies a potential secret of celestial choreography, written not in a single building, but in the very gates that controlled entry and exit. These were not merely defensive bottlenecks, but carefully positioned apertures in the city's stone shell. The proposal is compelling. The placement and orientation of certain key gates, like the formidable Röhrdotter or the Spittaltar, may have been calculated to interact with the sun on specific, significant days. Imagine the summer solstice sunrise. As the sun crests the horizon, its first golden rays could have been designed to pass in a direct, unobstructed line through the arch of a particular gate. This beam of light would then travel down a straight, narrow street, acting like a laser pointer from the heavens. Its target, perhaps a specific statue of the town's patron saint, nestled in a niche on a distant building. Or maybe it illuminated the altar of a small chapel at the end of that lane, just as morning mass began. This would transform a routine sunrise into a public celestial spectacle, witnessed by the entire community as they began their day. The alignment served a brilliant dual purpose, deeply practical and spiritually unifying. For a town like Rothenburg, whose economy and safety depended on strict calendars for markets, taxes, and guard rotations, a solar event marking the solstice or equinox provided a reliable annual reset for the civic clock. Everyone, from the councilman to the baker, saw the same confirmation that the year had turned, but the choice of a saint's day adds a richer layer. If a gate was aligned to illuminate a statue of St. George on his feast day, the event fused civic pride with divine favor. It visually declared that the town's patron watched over them, his image literally touched by heaven's light on his special day. This reinforced a powerful communal identity. The citizens weren't just residents, they were participants in a cosmic ritual authored into their own streets. The gates, symbols of security and control, became portals for divine light, demonstrating that the town's prosperity was woven into the fabric of the universe itself. This subtle integration of astronomy into urban planning speaks of a society that saw no divide between the sacred and the secular, between the science of the sun and the rhythm of daily life. The light show was a silent, annual sermon in stone and light, teaching every citizen their place in a beautifully ordered world. While the gates of Rothenburg marked time with a single annual beam, one city chose to capture the entire cosmos in a single, breathtaking machine. In the heart of Prague, mounted on the southern wall of the old town hall, a masterpiece of medieval engineering still performs its ancient dance. The Prague astronomical clock, installed in the early 15th century, is far more than a timepiece. It is the ultimate public expression of a worldview, a physical encyclopedia of time and the heavens designed for every citizen to read. To stand before its ornate face is to witness the medieval universe in miniature, a complex dialogue between human ingenuity and celestial order. The clock's primary function was to harmonize multiple, overlapping systems of time, each with its own profound meaning. At its core, it tracks the two most fundamental temporal cycles. The outer ring, with its Gothic numerals, shows the old Bohemian time, a system where the 24-hour day began at sunset. This was the time of daily life, of markets closing and curfews beginning, tied directly to the sun's disappearance. Inside this, another ring tracks the Babylonian hours, a system based on the varying length of daylight across the seasons. This was time measured in equal 12th divisions of the day, meaning an hour in summer was longer than an hour in winter. By displaying both, the clock acknowledged that time itself was not a single, rigid thing, but a layered concept shaped by culture and the sun's path. But the clock's genius soars beyond earthly hours. A central dial, adorned with the signs of the zodiac, maps the sun's journey through the constellations over the course of a year. A golden sun hand moves along this ring, showing both the time of day and the sun's current position in the ecliptic. Alongside it, a smaller sphere representing the moon not only tracks its phase, showing a silvery or dark face, but also indicates its position relative to the sun. This allowed farmers to know the moon's phase for planting, travelers to anticipate moonlight, and the church to calculate the movable feast of Easter, which is determined by the spring equinox and the lunar cycle. Below this celestial ballet, a calendar dial, added later but in perfect spirit, rotates to show the saint's day and the corresponding feast for every date of the year. This wove the liturgical calendar directly into the astronomical display, making it clear that the saint's days were not arbitrary, but were pinned to the same cosmic rhythm that governed the seasons and the tides. Every hour on the hour, this dense philosophical treatise comes to life in a theatrical performance. The figure of death, a skeleton, rings a bell and inverts an hourglass. The 12 apostles parade past windows, bestowing a blessing on the town. A golden rooster crows. This spectacle was not mere entertainment. It was a moral and civic ritual. It reminded the people of mortality, of divine presence, and of the preciousness of time itself, all while demonstrating the city's wealth and technical prowess. The Prague astronomical clock made the invisible visible. It took knowledge that was once locked in monastery libraries or complex astrolabes and placed it in the public square for all to see. An illiterate farmer could look up and understand the moon's phase. A merchant could verify the hour for a contract. A priest could confirm the saint's day. It served as the city's beating heart, synchronizing the community not just to a single hour, but to the grand, interlocking cycles of the cosmos. It declared that Prague was not just a place on a map, but a conscious participant in the orderly, beautiful, and divinely orchestrated dance of the universe. The public clock of Prague synchronized a city, but a far grander and older alignment once synchronized an entire empire with heaven itself. In the heart of Constantinople, now Istanbul, the great dome of the Hagia Sophia has dominated the skyline for 15 centuries. Built in the year 537 under the Emperor Justinian, this was not merely a church. It was the spiritual and political engine of the Byzantine Empire, a structure so revolutionary that its influence echoed through the medieval world for 1,000 years. Its orientation, while following the general Christian tradition of facing the altar eastward, was executed on an imperial scale, creating a symbolic pathway of absolute power. The main entrance for the emperor and his court was not through the common doors. He entered through a magnificent southwestern portal known as the Imperial Gate. From this moment, his procession was a carefully staged cosmic drama. The long nave stretched before him, a vast marble-paved avenue leading directly to the sanctuary and the high altar in the east. This axis was more than an aisle, it was a theological statement in stone. As the emperor processed toward the altar, he was walking from the earthly realm, represented by the entrance and the gathering of his subjects, toward the divine light of the rising sun that flooded the apse. His journey physically enacted the Byzantine political theology that saw him as God's sole viceroy on earth, the crucial link between heaven and his dominion. The architecture amplified this message at every step. Most compelling is the placement of the omphalion, a large circular section of inlaid marble on the floor just before the sanctuary. This was not decorative, it marked the exact spot where Byzantine emperors were crowned. The choice of this location was almost certainly deliberate, considering the play of light. Researchers suggest that on significant feast days, perhaps during the midday sun when ceremonies would peak, sunlight could have streamed through the high windows of the central dome to illuminate precisely this roundel. Imagine the scene, as the patriarch placed the crown on the emperor's head, standing upon the omphalion, a shaft of sunlight might have fallen upon him, bathing the new ruler in a visible, celestial radiance. This transformed the coronation from a political event into a cosmic one. It visually demonstrated that the emperor's authority was not taken, but received, directly illuminated by the divine order of the heavens. The entire Hagia Sophia functioned as a framework to project this idea. The dome, seemingly floating on a ring of light from its 40 windows, was understood as a representation of the vault of heaven. The glittering gold mosaics of Christ Pantocrator in the apex looked down upon the emperor below, creating a direct vertical axis of power between Christ in the celestial dome and his representative on the earthly omphalion. Every architectural choice reinforced the harmony between imperial power and cosmic law. For medieval rulers in the West, who often saw Byzantium as a rival but also a source of immense cultural prestige, the Hagia Sophia presented the ultimate model. Its grand scale, its luminous dome, and its profound integration of political ritual with sacred geometry became a distant ideal. It showed that architecture could do more than house the faithful. It could stage the very theater of divinely ordained kingship, using the sun itself as a spotlight to proclaim that the order of the state was a faithful reflection of the order of the cosmos. Far from the imperial spotlight, another order of monks pursued a different kind of celestial harmony, one that flowed not in light but in water. In the secluded valleys of 12th century Europe, the Cistercian monks became masters of a silent, liquid engineering. Their white-robed communities sought the wilderness not to escape the world, but to transform it into a perfectly ordered reflection of divine law, and their primary tool was a comprehensive, breathtakingly precise management of water. The placement of an entire monastery was the first act of this hydrological symphony. They did not choose a site for its defensive potential or its proximity to a city. They sought a specific kind of valley, one with a reliable, flowing stream and a gentle, consistent slope. This was not an accident of convenience. It was the foundational requirement for a system that would become their industrial circulatory system. The monastery building itself was then positioned with meticulous care relative to this water source. Often, the church and main cloister were placed just downstream from the original stream's diversion point, ensuring that clean, fresh water entered the monastic complex at the highest possible elevation. From this single point of control, the Cistercians engineered an elaborate network of stone-lined channels, aqueducts, and sluice gates. This system did far more than provide drinking water. It was a multi-layered utility grid. One channel would branch directly into the monastery's kitchen and brewery. Another would feed the lavatorium, the stone wash basin in the cloister where monks cleansed their hands before prayer, turning a practical act into a ritual of purity. Yet another carefully graded channel would power the mill, its water turning a heavy grindstone for flour, the physical sustenance of the community. But the most striking feature of their hydrological landscape were the extensive, rectangular fish ponds, often arranged in cascading series down the valley slope. These were not mere decorations. They were sophisticated aquaculture systems, providing a vital source of protein for a community that observed strict dietary rules. The alignment of this entire network reveals a profound understanding of natural and potentially celestial rhythms. The channels were dug along precise gradients to maintain a steady, controllable flow without erosion or stagnation. The placement of the mill and its wheel was calculated to harness maximum hydraulic force, which depended on the consistent volume of water provided by seasonal rains and snowmelt cycles governed by the solar year. More subtly, the orientation of the fish ponds may have been influenced by the sun's path. A pond aligned to receive maximum southern sunlight would warm more efficiently, promoting algae growth and creating a healthier, more productive environment for the fish, effectively using the sun as a passive heater to optimize their food supply. For the Cistercians, this was not merely advanced farming, it was theology in practice. Their rule emphasized manual labor as a form of prayer, a concept called ora et labora, pray and work. By creating a water system that functioned with such silent, efficient perfection, they were participating in the inherent order God had built into creation. To manage water well was to cooperate with a fundamental element of life, to channel divine providence literally through their own hands. The gentle sound of water flowing through stone channels was the constant background music to their contemplation, a physical reminder of grace in motion. Their entire industrial infrastructure, from mill to pond, became a machine for living in a state of grace, where every turning wheel and every swimming fish was a testament to a universe designed to be fruitful and harmonious. In these quiet valleys, the alignment was not a single line to a star, but a comprehensive, flowing integration of human need with terrestrial and celestial patterns. The Cistercians showed that cosmic participation could be as humble and essential as directing a stream, proving that the most profound dialogues with creation often speak in the language of practical, flowing grace. High above the bustling city of Prague, within the silent, soaring vaults of St. Vitus Cathedral, time itself was measured by a single, piercing beam of sunlight. Here, in the 17th century, an astronomer named Johannes Klein installed a device of elegant simplicity into the very fabric of the Gothic structure, a meridian line. Its principle was ancient, yet its placement was profoundly symbolic. In a south-facing window of the cathedral, a small, precisely drilled hole was created. Its purpose was singular, to act as a camera obscura, a natural projector. Each day, as the sun crossed the local meridian, the imaginary north-south line in the sky directly overhead, its light passed through that tiny aperture. On the cathedral's stone floor, a bright, distinct spot of light appeared, traveling across a brass line embedded in the marble. The moment that spot of light intersected perfectly with that line was solar noon, the true astronomical midday for that location, unmediated by any human mechanism. This was not a public spectacle like the great clock in the square below. It was a quiet, scientific ritual, a celestial truth embedded in a sacred space. In an age when mechanical clocks were becoming more common but were notoriously unreliable, losing or gaining significant minutes each day, this sunspot provided an absolute standard. Church officials and timekeepers would use it to verify and correct the castle's mechanical clocks, ensuring that the time governing ceremonies, markets, and civic life was not a product of faulty gears, but was anchored to the immutable motion of the earth around the sun. The choice of location is what makes this alignment so resonant. They did not build a separate observatory tower. They chose the cathedral, the heart of spiritual and temporal power in Bohemia. By drilling that small hole into the holy architecture, they were making a definitive statement that the ultimate authority for measuring time was not man-made but divine, written in light across the heavens. The Gothic cathedral, already aligned to the east for the rising sun, now also contained a precise southward alignment for the sun's zenith. It became a complete solar instrument, framing the sun's entire daily arc from sacred birth at dawn to authoritative peak at noon. This humble brass line in the floor represents a pivotal moment of transition, where medieval trust in celestial cycles met the emerging precision of early modern science, all within the enduring shadow of faith. It reminds us that before we could trust the tick of a clock, we had to learn to read the silent, moving language of a sunbeam on a stone. The sunbeam on St. Vitus's floor marked a single, precise moment. But in the wind-swept fields of Brittany, entire forests of stone stand as silent calendars from a forgotten age. The Karnak alignments are a landscape-scale phenomenon, thousands of prehistoric standing stones arranged in parallel rows that stretch for miles across the countryside. Erected millennia before the first medieval cathedral, their original purpose remains a subject of intense debate, with compelling theories pointing to complex lunar and solar observatories, perhaps tracking the moon's complex 18.6-year cycle. Yet long after their Neolithic builders vanished, these stones did not fall into obscurity. They entered the imagination and sacred practice of the medieval communities who lived among them, creating a profound palimpsest on the land. Local folklore did not see them as inert monuments. They were a population frozen by the spells of saints or the wrath of pagan gods, transformed into stone armies forever marching across the heath. This act of myth-making was a way to domesticate the inexplicable, to weave these enigmatic giants into a comprehensible Christian narrative. More tangibly, the medieval church often engaged in a practice of strategic absorption. Rather than demolishing these potent pagan sites, which could risk alienating local populations, they frequently built their own places of worship nearby, effectively baptizing the ancient sacred geography. A small medieval chapel might be constructed just at the edge of a major stone alignment, its own axis subtly referencing the pre-existing megalithic lines. In doing so, the new church did not erase the old power of the place, it channeled it. The alignment of the stones, which may have once framed the rising of a significant star or the solstice sun, now became a processional approach to a Christian altar. The celestial pathway was preserved, but its destination was reinterpreted. This represents a brilliant continuity of sacred intent across thousands of years. The medieval farmers who attended Mass in that chapel were, perhaps unknowingly, participating in a ritual geography their deepest ancestors had established. They were walking the same lines under the same sky for a new understanding of the divine. This reuse shows that the medieval mind was acutely sensitive to the spiritual charge of a landscape. They recognized that certain places held power, a presence that preceded written history. By building their churches in concert with these ancient astronomical lines, they were not practicing superstition. They were acknowledging a timeless truth that some points on the earth naturally converse with the heavens, and that this conversation is a legacy worth inheriting and renewing. The stones of Karnak are a bridge across time, where a Neolithic lunar observatory quietly becomes the foundation for a medieval parish, proving that the desire to align human worship with cosmic order is a thread unbroken by the rise and fall of empires or gods. The enduring dialogue between stone and sun was not a relic reserved for a building's foundation. It could be spoken anew even centuries later in an architectural afterthought. At the mighty Durham Cathedral, a fortress of Norman faith perched high above a river bend, a delicate anomaly graces its western end. This is the Galilee Chapel, a late 12th century addition that seems to contradict the cathedral's own stern logic. While the main church follows the sacred eastward orientation, the Galilee Chapel is a western porch, a space traditionally associated with penitents and those not yet fully admitted to the church community. Its very name evokes a borderland, the region of Galilee on the periphery of Judea. Yet within this seemingly secondary space, scholars detect a carefully calculated play of light that suggests its design was anything but an afterthought. The chapel's large, rounded arches and expansive windows are oriented to the southwest, a deliberate turn away from the altar's east. This unusual alignment has a compelling purpose: to capture the low, angled rays of the winter sun. During the short days of December and January, when the sun travels a low arc across the southern sky, light pours into the Galilee chapel with an intensity absent in the summer months. One compelling theory focuses on the chapel's most sacred charge. It houses the tomb of the Venerable Bede, the 8th-century scholar known as the father of English history. Bede's feast day is celebrated on May 25th, a spring date. However, some researchers propose the chapel's light might have been orchestrated for a different, symbolic alignment, perhaps illuminating his resting place during the winter solstice period, a time of metaphorical rebirth. Whether marking a specific date or a season, the effect transforms the space. For penitents gathered in this western gallery, the winter sunlight flooding in would have created a palpable contrast to the deep, perpetual shadow of the massive Norman nave behind them. They stood in a Galilee of light, a zone of illumination and hope on the threshold of the dark, solemn church, their path to forgiveness literally brightened by the sun's low journey. This sophisticated light play in a later edition proves a vital point. The medieval master mason's mind remained a celestial instrument. Even when expanding a finished masterpiece, he thought in terms of solar trajectories and symbolic illumination, ensuring that every stone, no matter when laid, continued the silent, luminous conversation between human devotion and the turning heavens. The winter sun in Durham's chapel speaks a language of hope, but for a medieval Muslim worshipper, the most essential direction was not marked by light but by faith. In every mosque, from the grandest congregational sanctuary to the humblest rural prayer room, one wall holds a sacred and non-negotiable alignment. This is the Qibla wall, containing the mihrab niche that points the faithful toward the Kaaba in Mecca. To face Mecca during prayer is one of the 5 pillars of Islam, a physical act of unity that binds the global community of believers, the Ummah, into a single spiritual orientation. But in the medieval world, determining that exact direction from a distant land like Spain or Central Asia was not a matter of simple intuition. It was a supreme challenge of mathematical astronomy, a problem that mobilized some of the finest minds of the age and left its solution permanently etched in stone. The imperative was clear, but the method was complex. For early communities, especially those far from the heartlands, scholars employed a range of techniques. They used quadrant observations to measure the sun's altitude at noon, and they calculated the direction of the pole star at night. They compiled tables of geographical coordinates, painstakingly recording the longitude and latitude of cities across the known world. Using spherical trigonometry, a discipline Islamic mathematicians perfected, they could then compute the great circle direction, the shortest path over the Earth's curve, from their location to Mecca. This was not abstract science, it was applied devotion. The result of these calculations was then translated directly into architecture. When a mosque was built, the master builder, advised by the local astronomer or muwakit, would set the Qibla wall with meticulous care. Sometimes, as in the Great Mosque of Cordoba, the alignment reflects an early calculation based on the direction of the Syrian city of Damascus, which itself faced south toward Mecca. This created a visible variance from the true Great Circle direction later calculated, a fascinating fossil of evolving scientific understanding frozen in prayer. Other mosques, like those in Cairo or Samarkand, showcase astonishing accuracy, their Qibla walls standing as permanent testaments to the precision of medieval Islamic science. This created a vast, silent network across continents. From the shores of the Atlantic to the edges of China, every mosque was a node in this global alignment, its mihrab a compass needle forever fixed on the spiritual center. The act of prayer thus became layered with profound meaning. As a merchant in Granada or a scholar in Baghdad bowed toward Mecca, they were not just fulfilling a religious duty. They were participating in a cosmic orientation made possible by human ingenuity, their bodies aligned along a vector determined by stars, sun, and complex calculation. The Qibla wall is perhaps the purest expression of the medieval fusion of faith and science. It made the mosque a classroom where the laws of the universe were acknowledged and obeyed in the same motion as divine law. It turned every prayer into a reaffirmation that the world was knowable, measurable, and beautifully ordered, and that human intellect, rightly applied, could find its true direction home. This final alignment is not a single building, but an entire island of the mind, a landscape where earth, sky, and story became one. In the Somerset Levels of England, the great hill of Glastonbury Tor rises with a solitary, almost artificial majesty from the surrounding wetlands. For the medieval pilgrim, this was not just a hill. It was the legendary Isle of Avalon, the mystical resting place of King Arthur, and the heart of a sacred geography constructed from layers of celestial alignment, architectural intention, and powerful myth. The alignment begins with the land itself. The Tor does not stand alone. It forms a part of a larger, perceived pattern with other ancient hills, like the man-made pyramid of Silbury Hill and the megalithic circles at Stonehenge. Medieval writers and local tradition wove these sites into a single narrative tapestry, suggesting they were laid out by giants, angels, or the wise Merlin as a grand celestial diagram upon the earth. This idea of a designed landscape gave every feature meaning, turning a simple walk into a pilgrimage through a symbolic cosmos. At the foot of the Tor, the ruins of Glastonbury Abbey anchor this celestial story in Christian tradition. In the 12th century, monks at the Abbey made a stunning claim. They had discovered the tombs of King Arthur and Queen Guinevere. This was more than a tourist attraction. It was a masterstroke of myth-making that fused British legendary history with monastic authority. But the foundational myth went deeper. A beautiful story, first recorded in the 13th century, told that Joseph of Arimathea, the man who provided the tomb for Christ, had come to Glastonbury as a missionary. He thrust his staff into the ground on Wiriol Hill, where it miraculously took root and grew into the holy thorn, a hawthorn tree that bloomed every Christmas. This legend did something extraordinary. It claimed that Christianity arrived in Britain before it even reached Rome, making Glastonbury the primal heart of British faith. The Abbey's very stones were said to be aligned and consecrated by this divine lineage. The architecture of the Abbey and the chapel on the Tor worked in concert with this lore. The Tor, often crowned with a chapel dedicated to Saint Michael the Archangel, conqueror of pagan spirits, was seen as a place of spiritual ascent and celestial vision. Its alignment with other sites in the landscape created invisible lines of power that pilgrims could walk, physically tracing the connections between mythic history and heavenly promise. Medieval writers described Glastonbury as a gateway between worlds, a thin place where the veil between the earthly and the spiritual was translucent. The annual flooding of the Somerset Levels would physically isolate the Tor, making it an island, a perfect visual representation of the otherworldly Isle of Avalon. Pilgrims arriving by boat would see the Tor rising from the mists, a vision that matched the stories they had heard. This holistic construction, part topography, part architecture, part celestial story, created a pilgrimage center of immense power. A visitor walking from the Abbey, past the Holy Thorn, and up the spiraling path to the summit of the tour was not just taking a hike. They were reenacting a spiritual journey from historical foundation to heavenly aspiration, their every step guided by a landscape that had been intentionally read as a map of both earth and sky. Glastonbury represents the ultimate expression of the medieval desire for cosmic order. Here, the alignment was not merely an architectural feature, but an entire environment, a synthesis where every hill, every building, and every star in the local lore was woven into a single, compelling truth. It shows us that the greatest celestial architecture of the Middle Ages was sometimes built not from stone, but from story, using the very land as its foundation and the human longing for connection as its blueprint. From solstice sunlight in a tomb to the Qibla wall in a mosque, we have journeyed through 25 profound examples of celestial wisdom set in stone and landscape. These alignments were not mere coincidences or happy accidents of history. Each one stands as a deliberate act of world building, a conscious choice to connect the work of human hands to the eternal, silent cycles of the cosmos. They remind us that our ancestors saw themselves as active participants in a grand, ordered universe. Their cathedrals, castles, and city streets were not built against nature, but as an extension of it, a permanent dialogue with the sun, moon, and stars. This changes how we see history. It is no longer just a timeline of battles and kings, but a chronicle of a deep, enduring conversation between the human spirit and the sky. As you walk through your own city now, look at the old buildings, the long straight avenues, the placement of a local church. I challenge you to ask a simple, transformative question. What is it aligned with? The past has left us maps in masonry and landscape, subtle blueprints of a forgotten cosmic literacy, waiting only for curious eyes to read them. If this exploration of hidden connections has resonated with you, we would love to hear your thoughts. Share in the comments below any potential alignments you have noticed in your own part of the world, and subscribe for more journeys into history's deepest, most luminous mysteries.